Final Fantasy XIII-2 is the first direct sequel to Final Fantasy XIII, and the second stop on our 3-stop journey through the Lightning Saga. It was released in the West January 31st of 2012 and reached my grubby little fingertips the same year. And unlike Final Fantasy XIII, I remember this game, and I remember it quite fondly. In fact, I remember this game more fondly than I do most entries in the Final Fantasy series, having played it twice now, although last time was about 5 years ago. And before I start, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who watched the original video and subbed. So if you don't care and just want to skip to where I start talking about the game, the timestamp should be on screen somewhere. So I just wanted to take a moment to say, I started this whole YouTube thing because I've got some seriously bad ADHD, and I wanted a project to actually focus on and give my all to for once in my life. And seeing the support I've gotten is honestly really great. I never figured I would have gotten to 100 subs, much less a quarter of 1,000. And I mean support in every way, not just the comments in favor of the video saying they enjoyed it, I did a good job, but also the comments that are criticizing and helping point out my flaws. All of these comments help me out immensely because I do think that the video is an objectively poorly put together one, and it's something I'm not, super happy with. None of my videos are, for that matter. I'm still growing and learning how to do everything, so comments like these ones that point out flaws or critique my works, I appreciate them exponentially, and I welcome them. Although there was one comment that cracked me up, and it's this one right here, and disregarding the rest of the comment, this part right here about how I'm probably a 30-year-old man got a chuckle out of me. I mean, hey, you were close on the age guess. You were only off by about 11 years. I turned 20 next month, but you know what they say, 20 is the new 30 and all that, and I'm 19, which is basically 20, so we can round up. So, I'm actually pretty basically 30, so, I'll give it to you. You were close. With that said, however, as I mentioned before, I wasn't really happy with how I put together my FF13 video, with it essentially being just me recapping the story. It's something I thought about a lot after I uploaded it and watched it back one more time, so don't expect this video to be similar to that previous one. I'm gonna try my hardest to do have a little more structure with it and actually discuss the things I like and dislike with the game going forwards. Now then, with all that boring intro stuff out of the way, let's get to actually talking about the game. So I wanted to get this out of the way as soon as I possibly could, because I think it will be the biggest barrier to entry to anyone trying to play this game in the year 2023 and going forwards. I cannot imagine most people will be going out and finding a copy of this game for their PS3 or Xbox 360. What most people, including me, will do is opt to play it through the Steam port. And oh man, oh me, oh my, was this a shockingly bad port. FF13 had its problems with its port, but I never really experienced anything too terrible with it. The biggest problem I had there was it sometimes struggled to maintain a consistent 60 FPS. 13.2 on the other hand has those frame rate issues as well as a whole slew of other problems. So as I just mentioned, 13.2 suffers from some really bad frame rate issues, and seemingly at random. Sometimes when I'm running around the world, the game is going completely fine and without any issues in the slightest. But then I move to a new area and all of a sudden, we're dropping to 20 FPS. And it's not like I'm running the game on a toaster. I've got a decently strong PC, not the top of the line, but still strong enough to run pretty much any game I could want to play at 60 FPS on the highest graphics, especially a game that came out 11 years ago. But of course, I wouldn't be making an entire section dedicated to the game being a buggy port if it was just the frame rate issues. Now, I was expecting the FPS drops since 13 had them as well. However, I also distinctly remembered that the game crashed quite often back when I was playing it in late 2017 and early 2018. And sure enough, not even 20 minutes into the game, right after getting through the opening, as I was loading into the tutorial segment, my game crashed, and I wasn't trying to deal with the constant crashes, so I looked a bit online. What I found from the search was that a lot of people are saying the problems arise because the game only allows for up to 2 gigabytes of VRAM. There is a patch for this online to allow for 4 gigabytes of VRAM usage. However, others said that just turning off the Steam cloud saving fixes the issues as well, and not wanting to have to, mess too much with mods and patching, since I'm not all too well versed in the workings of PCs other than how to build one and how to play games, I opted instead to just shut off the cloud saving. And to my joy, it worked. The crashes, for the most part, stopped. Although not entirely, the only other time I crashed was twice, back to back, about 15 hours of playtime into the game. Now, those 2 problems could have been forgiven, and I would have only mentioned them in passing if it were not for this last bug. So I want you to take a look here at the screen. Now you might miss it because it's quite hard to tell what's happening, but if you have 20/20 vision like me, you should be able to tell that, that all-encompassing black void it's not supposed to be there. Now this bug is different from the other ones where it can happen at random. It's actually a bug that is initiated by the player. When it first showed up, I had no idea why it was there. But eventually, a few hours later, I realized what causes this void to start rearing its ugly head. So what you need to understand is that I'm not constantly recording my playthroughs. That would amount in way more footage than I actually need for these videos. What I opt for instead is to record somewhere between 4 to 8 hours of various random things in the world whenever I'm not talking about something specific or just need background footage. And accompanying that footage of random things is footage of me doing the major story events, cutscenes, moments, etc., which usually leaves me in the 12 to 16 hours of recordings range. Now I'm telling you this because you gotta understand that I alt-tab a lot to start and stop recordings, and whenever I do so, I've gotten into the habit of hitting escape, because it pauses the game and brings up a menu to quit out, making it perfect to start a recording right as a cutscene is starting. Now while this was convenient for FF13, it has become a nuisance in 13.2, because this is the way you spawn in the Black Void. You open up any of the menus, this can be your inventory, the map, anything like that, and you press escape. Once you tab back into the game, you'll notice that the background has changed to be completely black. This means the Black Void has successfully been summoned forth. And the weirdest thing about this is that it doesn't take effect everywhere. It's only on specific spots on specific maps. For example, the Brescia Ruins gets it extraordinarily bad. However, the Archive Steppe, it's hardly, if at all, ever noticeable. There is, however, one saving grace, a light in the dark, that being a way to make this port not so sucky. There is a superbly extensive guide on not only how to mod the game so that it's fixed and runs like it should have, but also enhances it past what a normal port would be expected to do. Of course, just because there is ways to make the game run well does not excuse the absolutely mind-bogglingly bad porting job that has been done for the PC. Square Enix is a very wealthy and very well-known and highly regarded developer and publisher. This kind of a porting job should never have happened. But I mean, there is no use in spending more time complaining about it now because it is never going to get fixed, and if you want to make it run how it should have been running from the start, then you'll have to do it yourself. Or go out and find a copy for your PS for your Xbox and play it that way. Let's say, however, you got past the hurdle that is the overwhelmingly poorly done port. How does the game play? If you've seen the original video on FF13, you know that I really disliked the execution of its combat. I thought the core idea of it was really extremely interesting, while the implementation of that idea was lacking. Namely, my major issues were the paradigm shifting having that unnecessary animation tied to it, the party AI being a little wank at times, and should your party lead die, it's an instant game over. and I can happily, with a big giant wide smile on my face, say that they fixed almost every problem I had with its combat. That smile, however, doesn't last super long, because in fixing a lot of those issues, they bring out a whole new bag of issues that are this game exclusive. So gone are the days of long animations during a shift. Now you're able to just shift and be done with it. Gone are the days in which your party leader's death equates to a party wipe. Now instead, should your party leader die, you just switch to the other living party member to act as your lead. Gone as well is the 3 party member setup. Now you only have 2 permanent party members, that being our 2 protagonists, and in place of what would usually be a 3rd party member, we are granted the monster system. The monster system is simple really. You have a chance to catch a monster from a battle, kinda like a Pokemon, after which you can toss them into your team. Each monster has one of the party roles, so one monster could be a synergist and another could be a ravager, so on and so forth. And you can have up to 3 monsters on your team at a time that you can switch between. And this is where my first gripe with the combat comes into play. You have less freedom of choice overall when it comes to your paradigms. Very minor however it may be, it is still something that I feel is a downgrade from the first game. In FF13, all 6 of your party members have access to all 6 of the roles. The monsters in this game can only have 1 role, which means that now, instead of having a total of 18 roles across 3 different party members, you were only granted 15 roles across 2 permanent party members and 1 interchangeable/superfluous member. I know that it is an extremely small problem, if it's a problem at all, but this is my video, and I'm a petty bitch, and I appreciated the freedom granted by having every role on every character in the first game. These aforementioned monsters also have a unique ability known as the Feral Link. Feral Links are monster-specific abilities, in which you do a short QuickTime event. The better you perform the QuickTime event, the stronger the output of the ability. Each ability does their own thing, be it damage, a heal, removing debuffs, so on and so forth. I don't hate these, however, a good majority of Feral Links are not useful at all and kind of pointless. Another new mechanic that was introduced into this game is the wound mechanic. Basically, some attacks from enemies have the chance to inflict wound damage. Wound damage you sustain will lock out from your max HP pool. So if you have 800 HP total and you take 10 wound damage, your max HP is reduced down to 790 for the remainder of the battle. For the most part, wound mechanics only come up during boss fights and unique encounters. The way you get rid of a wound during a fight is by using a wound potion, an elixir, a phoenix down provided that the party member used on was dead, and certain Feral Link abilities. If you couldn't tell, I don't really like the wound mechanic. It just seems really pointless and almost like a band-aid for this game's lack of difficulty, because for the most part, this game is really fucking easy. Even without the wound mechanic, I was never worried that I was gonna fail a fight. As it is, it just serves to be an annoyance to force the player to spend a little extra gil on some wound potions to patch themselves up during a fight. And I can understand why people might enjoy the wound mechanic, because at its core, I think it is a interesting and neat mechanic. I feel like it would have just been served better if it was only for specific enemies and fights, as a sort of way to make them stand apart from the crowd, similar to the Doom mechanic from the Eidolon fights in FF13. On the topic of the game's difficulty, it is almost the polar opposite of 13. Where in 13, the game was actually a decent challenge where you'd have to use your brain to win encounters and beat bosses. This game requires approximately 0% of your brain cells to be functioning in order to win a majority of the time. I unironically think that you could just run a Ravager Commando Medic paradigm, not shift for the entire game, and probably still 5-star most of the fights. It is so unbelievably easy, I was tempted for a moment to download the difficulty mod just to bump up the challenge a bit. Because believe it or not, I actually enjoyed the level of difficulty FF13 was at. I just didn't like a lot of the design choices surrounding the combat paired with the difficulty the game brought. Leveling up is pretty much the exact same idea as before, except this time around you have one Crystarium board shared between all roles available, rather than before where each role had its own different pathway that you just leveled up. Each time you level up a board to the max, you can pick between a few bonus options. It's a nice way to give players a choice with how they choose to progress their characters. The monsters level up slightly differently than the characters do. Instead of gaining CP, you use little components and items that you get from defeating other monsters or purchasing from shops to level them up. You can also merge monsters together to give more favorable bonuses to monsters you actually like. Each monster also has a few randomly assigned traits to it, each meaning something different. For example, early peakers can only get up to level 20. Strong monsters get strength improvements, so on and so forth. This is something I do not like so much when it comes to growing a monster. If you've seen my video on Genshin Impact, you know I really despise RNG when it comes to character progression, so the monsters having a chance of a randomness is annoying to me, although it's really not the end of the world. The weapon upgrading system from 13 is gone and has been replaced with a more traditional Final Fantasy system of just getting gradual weapon upgrades as the story progresses. Although there is still a form of upgrading weapons in which to buy certain stronger weapons, one of the required components can be older, weaker weapons. One final change that I kinda do and don't like in a way is battles are now random, with the monsters just spawning in, giving you the chance to hit them to start an encounter with a preemptive strike, or just walk up and touch them to get a normal battle. This is nice, it makes avoiding battles easier, and makes getting preemptive strikes easier. At the same time, however, there was a certain charm to 13 having the enemies visible on the world's map. It made it feel a little bit more lively when you saw the enemies you were gonna fight walking about the world. However, at the end of the day, I am more or less indifferent to this change. I think that both styles have merit to stand on their own, so I will let you decide which you prefer. I believe that is for the most part everything important pertaining to the combat and player progression. In a lot of ways, it's an improvement from FF13, however, it's also got some changes that do kinda suck. I can kinda see it going either way in terms of which combat people enjoy more, because they both have their strengths and weaknesses. For me personally, I enjoyed the moment-to-moment mechanics of 13.2 more. However, I would have appreciated a little more difficulty similar to 13. Hello, yes, it's me from the future. I forgot to mention this here, but I kinda touched on it with Phalanx a little bit. There's a fucking ton of QuickTime events in this game. I never really minded QuickTime events, to be honest, but I know that a lot of people hate them, so I figured that it is worth mentioning that, they're here and they're quite prevalent, mostly whenever you fight a boss. If you do good in them, you'll usually get a bonus reward at the end of a boss encounter, and that's really to the extent that they affect the gameplay. Alright, let's get back to the video now. Now, while the combat and character progression have made some improvements and also brought out some new problems, I think there is one part of this game that was undoubtedly much better than 13 was. Let's face it, FF13 was not really that great when it came to letting its world shine. We only got to see a few small linear areas and never got to learn much about them as we went through them, only being spoon-fed small bits of lore and history for each one as we went through, provided you don't go and read through the million data log entries, which I can guarantee most people won't have done, and if you did do that, I've got so much respect for you. 13 and 13.2 are set in the same world. We go and visit locations that we've already been to, places we've already seen before, and it makes sense from a business and money-making perspective to do this. They already have the assets ready to use from 13 and they want to capitalize on the success, so they just have their player revisit the places that we did in 13. 13.2 just overall does a better job at letting its world shine and setting up set pieces. I mean, so many of these locations are absolutely stunning, it just goes to serve to put into perspective how pretty the Lightning Saga actually was at the time. I mean, Academia is one fictional city that I would kill to live in. I mean, just take a gander at it. It's gorgeous, except for the part where people are, being turned into Seath, but that gets fixed eventually. And noticeably right off the bat, the areas that you are visiting are significantly less linear overall, with more branching paths and different routes for the player to use for navigating the world. However, most importantly, side activities. That's right, baby. Not only is the world less linear, but there's actually, from the get-go, side quests and side activities for the player to engage in. Not even 30 minutes into the game, and I was given a side quest to go find some medical supplies. It was such a refreshing feeling to see that there were actually things other than just the main story to do in each area. And yeah, to be fair, most of the time the side activities do boil down to just being a fetch quest or a hunting job, which can get rather stale and boring really fast, but then there are things like this. I came to this completely optional area of the game because there was an item I needed for the main story here, which sounds a little contradictory. I know, if it's an optional area, why is there something you needed for the main story here, which I'll cover in a bit. But basically, the TLDR is just, you need to get 5 specific items for the main story, and there's 7 total, 4 of which are located in non-optional areas, 3 of which are located in areas that are potentially completely optional, meaning you'll have to travel to one of them, but you can choose which one of the 3 you wish to go to. I'm getting sidetracked here. As I was saying, there are times where things such as this optional side quest story happen, in which you have to find 5 colored flan and help them get back home safely, after which they all try jumping you, and you get a nice callback to the beginning of the game where Sarah was revealed to be a teacher whose nickname was Meanie Miss Farron, because she can be a real bitch at times, and we get to see her wonderfully mean teacher charm here. These were the kind of optional moments that were sorely lacking in the first game. And speaking of optional, I quickly touched on it during my little rant there, but there are optional areas in this game. Completely and utterly optional, which, credit where it is due, 13 also had. However, there is a difference. 13's optional areas do not come into play until you've gone through most of the game. 13.2's optional areas can come into play really early. The first optional area that I got to visit was the Brescia Ruins 300 AF. It's basically just a snowy version of the Brescia Ruins in which you are limited to the top portion of the map, but this entire place is completely optional. You never need to come here, and unlike 13, I was able to get here not even 5 hours of playtime into the game. That is massive. That means that any point along my journey through the main story, I could stop and take a break and go do other optional tasks. You could not do that in 13. Taking a break from the main story in FF13 looked something along the lines of exiting the game and playing something else for a bit. I cannot express enough how much having all this optional content makes the main story more tolerable. And to top it all off, the absolute cherry on the cake, you can revisit past areas whenever the hell you want to. Unlike 13, you can choose to go back to an area you've already been to. And in fact, the game wants you to. It will actively send you back to older locations to grab an item that you need or unlock a different branching path to progress the main story. And speaking of main story, this seems like a perfect time to start talking about it. And you had better buckle up because the story is fucking bonkers. So do y'all remember in my first video how I spent basically 50 minutes explaining the story? I'm gonna try and not do that here, and instead just go over the main important bits. The story opens with a beautiful cutscene set in the mythical city of Valhalla of Lightning fighting this dude named Caius Ballad, who is just way too overly edgy, which is how you can tell he's the bad guy. During the fight, this other fellow named Noel Kreis falls out of the sky. Lightning grabs him and gives him this little annoying piece of shit Moogle, which, mini rant about here, I cannot fucking stand little mascot characters like this in games. You know, this Moogle from 13.2, Morgana from Persona 5, fucking Paimon from Genshin. I can't stand characters like this. Anyways, Lightning tells Noel to go find her sister and bring her to Lightning in Valhalla. We get to see Sarah having a dream of all this happening right before a meteor falls and Noel arrives. They go check the meteor and Noel says that it's a time gate that they can use to travel between time. That's right, baby. 13.2 is a time travel story. Noel and Sarah decide they should set off and go find Lightning. We arrive in the Brescia ruins 5 years after Cocoon fell, which is how they denote time in this game, marked as AF, 5AF being 5 years after Cocoon fell, and are promptly attacked by a giant floating fist. This is where we're introduced to the paradoxes, basically things from different timelines appearing in timelines that they aren't meant to be in. For example, the floating fist is actually Atlas, a giant war machine from the future appearing in the past. We are then promptly arrested because we're, suspicious individuals who just popped out of a time gate, but we're quickly bailed out by a new character, Alyssa Zidell. She works for the Academy, which is the governing power that has taken over Cocoon in the vacuum left after the Foul Sea were dealt with. She asks for our help in dealing with Atlas. We do so, getting the choice to weaken him or fight him head on. After beating Atlas, we find a graveyard for those who died in the Purge, and we get an artifact. Basically, the key to opening gates and jumping through time. We get the choice between two gates here. I choose to go first to the Yashas Massif 10AF. There we meet Hope and Alyssa again, and we get to see an Oracle Drive. Hope explains that the city used to be home to the Farseers, people who can see the future, and the drive is like a stored version of the visions they've seen. Through the Oracle Drive, we see what happened at the end of 13 with Cocoon falling and being propped up by the pillar, and go to find another artifact, opening a gate to Erba 200AF. Put a pin in that though, because for now, we go back to the Brescia ruins to open up the other gate to the Sunlit Waterscape 300AF. We meet up with Snow, who's looking extra edgy now, and he basically says he's trying to stop this massive flan from nibbling away at the pillar holding up Cocoon. We leave in search of a way to weaken the flan and arrive at this Colosseum to get a fragment from this time dude. The Colosseum won't come into play until later when I talk about the DLC, so just kinda don't pay it any mind right now. We also go to the Archival Steppe, Unknown AF, where a big dragon monster is sucking up all the flan. We quickly put a stop to that and return to the Waterscape where Snow is trying to fight the flan again and getting his ass kicked. We beat it and solve the paradox. Snow disappears because he don't belong in this time. We head off to finish up what we started in Erba 200AF. In Erba, we do a bunch of little mini puzzles to restore the world back to normal. We come across another Oracle Drive and see more about what happened at the end of 13. Yule, who is the Cirrus that Hope had mentioned before, is also here. Noel apparently knows her, but Caius shows up and tells us that it is not the same Yule and that there is a ton of Yules across all manner of timelines. We do battle with him, after which they both run off, and we open up an alternate version of the Yashas Massif, indicated by an X in place of a 0. We meet up with a different Yule and she says that Sarah and her are alike. We have a repeat of the meeting with Hope and Alyssa here and rewatch the Oracle Drive, which now shows Lightning fighting Caius in Valhalla. Noel tells the story about how Cocoon will eventually fall, which prompts Hope to start searching for a way to prepare for such an eventuality. We get to see as Yule dies and Caius carries her off. We briefly make a pit stop in this place called the Void Beyond, and Noel tells Sarah a bit more about Yule. After we get back to our time hopping, we wind up in Academia 400 AF, a massive city built on Pulse, powered by a proto-Fal'Cie that Hope had created. The Fal'Cie does not like us and starts turning random civilians into Seath to get in our way. We run into Caius, who tells us we are contradictions in the timeline. He says that we cannot be here because we died in a tower 200 years prior. We of course get really confused and give chase, eventually running into Yule, who is murdered by a hentai tentacle monster that we promptly kill. Yule tells us that Caius isn't actually in the city and dies, leaving us an artifact that we use to travel through a nearby gate to get to Augusta Tower 200 AF. I take a detour shortly after arriving to go to Augusta Tower 300 AF to get a key necessary to ascend the tower. After doing so, we head back to 200 AF and meet an AI version of Alyssa, who reveals that in 13 AF, she and Hope were murdered after Hope refused to give the fal'Cie the full powers of a natural-born fal'Cie. The AI killed everyone and made duplicate versions of them to cover it up, before creating the proto-fal'Cie Adam. We get to the top floor of the tower and meet the same Yule that we had met in Erba, which makes sense considering it's the same year. She gives us an artifact and tells us that Caius is immortal and that he knows the whole timeline from the Seeresses. She says that Caius, we saw in Academia, was an AI created by the fal'Cie, and that if we continue to change the timelines, eventually it will return to how it was at the end of 13. We go to the very top floor and face off against the fal'Cie Adam, who keeps regenerating. Eventually we yell at Hope in the past that his machines fucking suck, which he sees through an oracle drive and decides in the past to not make the machines, hence the one in the future that we're currently fighting disappears, and yes, Yule dies again and Caius takes her away. We wind up in an alternate version of Academia 400 AF in which Hope and Alyssa are actually alive and travel to the future through use of a cryostasis machine thingamajig. Hope tells us his new plan, which is to build an artificial cocoon, but he needs 5 gravity cores to make it float, which is the items that I was talking about in the linearity section. He also says that if we find a chaos crystal, he could use it, which is optional, but getting it will reward you with some of the best weapons in the game. After we deliver all the cores to Hope, Alyssa gives us an artifact to use on the new gate in town. They see us off from said gate, and we get a monologue from Alyssa about how she's actually a paradox, and if we are to fix the timeline, she'll cease to exist. This is good. I like this character drama and real human emotion. She betrays us here for her selfish want to live, which is something a lot of people would probably do. We wind up at the Void Beyond again, and Sarah talks with a few different Yules who reveal that Etro, a goddess in this universe, is the one who undid the party's crystal stasis at the end of FF13, and that Sarah has the eyes of Etro which allow her to see the future, and that she and Null are blessed by Etro. The last Yule tells her that she can have her heart's desires here, and that the more she changes time, the closer to death she draws. Sarah does battle with Caius, and he tells her that because Etro freed everyone from their crystal stasis at the end of FF13, she altered the timeline. The Yules are now cursed to die over and over at a young age, and he wishes to change that, even if it means killing her. He then murders Sarah, and she wakes up in a dream of New Bodom. She realizes that it's a dream when she sees a fake lightning, and Vanille and Fang appear to drag her out of it. They tell her to go rescue Null from his dream. Sarah pops into Null's dream and sees his past. Caius implores Null to kill him and become the next guardian of the Seeress. Doing so will grant him the Heart of Chaos, making him immortal. Should it ever stop beating, Valhalla will be unleashed, and history will cease to exist. Basically, time will stop flowing. Caius fights Null and realizes he is too weak to kill him, so he departs to go kill Etro himself, to free Yule from the cycle of death and rebirth. Yule then has a vision and dies in Null's arms. Sarah eventually wakes him up from his dream, and we depart from this dying world and arrive in New Bodom 700 AF, where we meet Lightning. She reveals what happened and how she came to be in Valhalla, having been sucked up and chosen as a champion basically for Etro. She reveals Caius' plan, which is to use the new cocoon and the old cocoon as a sacrifice to open Etro's gate, which will cause chaos to surge forth and bring the world to be the same state as Valhalla, in which time doesn't exist, freeing Yule from her curse. Which, I'm gonna be honest, at this point, I think we should just evacuate Cocoon and have everyone live on Pulse. Let's be real. This is twice now that a villain in the same universe has used Cocoon as a major key element in their evil master plan. And what is Cocoon really doing? Like, Hope is making a new Cocoon because the old Cocoon is gonna fall, but like, why the fuck didn't we just have everyone move into academia or build more cities? Pulse isn't exactly a small place. What was the point of building a new Cocoon if we could have just built more cities on Pulse? It's fucking stupid. Enough of my rambling though. Lightning says she'll be fighting Caius in Valhalla, whilst we have to stop Caius from bringing down both the new and old Cocoon in 500 AF. We all depart to start the final battle and arrive in Academia, with everyone having already been moved to the new artificial Cocoon. Yule tries her best to convince us not to fight Caius and to not kill Etro, which we just promptly ignore. We catch up to Caius, who turns into his Chaos Bahamut and attacks us, and we are saved by Hope. We give chase to him on an airship which is being piloted by Saz, who can time travel and conveniently showed up at the end of the game. A gate to Valhalla opens up and Caius goes through. We fight him and beat him again, and he still declares that he will kill Etro, and we try to convince him it's not what Yule would want.
You think this will make Yule happy?
Which Yule are you talking about? I've known and protected hundreds of Yules. They had the same soul. Every one of them was unique. A Yule who dreamed of travel. A Yule who loved to sing. A Yule who collected flowers. They all died. All of them. Before my eyes.
But despite that, she chose to live again. So she could be with you!
Caius then turns into his big ultimate form, that being Jet Bahamut, and we are blasted beneath the ocean and are saved by lightning and are thrust into the final boss fight. Caius once again implores Noel to kill him for Yule's sake, and when he refuses, impales himself onto Noel's blade, thereby killing himself. With that, the timeline is fixed and we return to 500 AF and are greeted with 9 different possible endings, so let's take a moment to go over each one, shall we? So starting off with the canonical ending, Saz grabs Vanille and Fang from the Cocoon pillar before Cocoon falls. The new Cocoon, which is named Bonavelza, rises into the sky, and Sarah has another vision and fucking dies in Noel's arms. The sky then darkens and the bells toll and Valhalla is unleashed into the world. If you get to see the secret ending, it is revealed that Caius is actually alive and is chilling in Etro's throne room, gloating about how he won and how Noel played right into his hands and stuff. The ending is continued in the DLC released in May of 2012. Lightning does battle with Caius and sees a vision of her sister's death. She then finds her sister being possessed by an evil Yule who conjures up another Caius for her to fight. She begins to lose hope, thinking that she's doomed her sister to death by sending her on the journey, but is renewed when a vision of her sister appears and tells her she knew the consequences and doesn't regret anything. While Valhalla bleeds into the real world, Lightning goes up and takes a seat upon Etro's throne, where she turns to Crystal to preserve the world and remember Sarah. And that's how the canonical ending goes. Now there are a bunch of different endings you can get called paradox endings, which are mostly just unique what if type scenarios, and these go as follows. Paradox ending number 1, a giant mistake. We get to see the Pulsion Civil War that brought down Cocoon in the future that Noel is from. Both sides of the conflict release a bunch of atlases in the Archival Steppe. Sarah and Noel vow to kill them all. It ends with their weapons lodged into the crystal atop one of the atlas's heads. Paradox ending number 2, Mischievous Mog's giant plan with Flan. Jesus, that's a fucking mouthful. We turn into a Morochu and a mini Flan to go poison the giant Flan that's eating away at Cocoon's pillar in the Sunlit Waterscape, because he wants to make the world human-free and a world with just monsters. Paradox ending number 3, Vanille's Truth. In this one, Noel and Sarah are in the past, I think, and see a crystallized Vanille and promise that we'll go find Fang for her. Paradox ending number 4, Test Subjects. The main party is modified by the Proto-Falsi Atom to act as guards in Augusta Tower. The party wonders what they were doing before losing their memory, and Adam questions if every human is just a bit paradoxical. Paradox ending number 5, The Future is Hope. Snow shows up in Academia 4XXAF and arrests Alyssa before she can give us the trapped artifact and betray us. He warns Hope that he's going to be assassinated in 3 days, and Noel stays back to keep watch, while Sarah and Snow run off to find 13 crystals. Paradox ending number 6, Beneath a Timeless Sky. The party plus Yule are trapped in Bodum 700AF. Yule cannot see the future because the timeline has collapsed. A meteor lands where the gate did in Bodum 3AF, and the gang goes to investigate. Editor's note, the way she runs is fucking hilarious. Paradox ending number 7, Fate and Freedom. Sarah remains in her dream after being killed by Caius, and thinks it won't be quite complete without Noel and Mog, but she can't really remember them. Paradox ending number 8, Heir to Chaos. Noel gets the Heart of Chaos and succeeds Caius as the Guardian of Yule. He sees the memories in the future and vows to save everyone from their doomed fate. And that is all the different endings that you can get. Most of the Paradox endings are just cute little what-if type scenarios, and to be honest, they aren't really worth going for considering the amount of work that most of them take. So that is the complete story of 13-2, and I gotta say, I'm not a fan. I think it is by far a lot worse than 13's story. It is so needlessly complex and wacky. I don't think I've ever really found a time-traveling plot that I've thought was great, but man oh man, this story feels so disjointed at times, because with each new time you go to, there's always a minor conflict, but there's also the larger overarching conflict with Caius. For example, when you go to Academia, the plot is you gotta stop the Falsi Atom and restore the city back to peace. But at the same time, there is always the overarching plot of stopping Caius and returning the timeline to how it should be. But for most of the middle part of the game, that takes a backseat to the smaller plot points in each individual timeline. It's just a very confusing and poorly presented narrative overall that will often leave the player scratching their head, which kinda sucks, because I think that the core of the story is at least a little compelling. A man who is cursed with immortality who can never die, being forced to protect a girl who can never live, so he decides to go kill the goddess Etro out of love for the girl? That's fucking great! It's compelling, and Caius is a very interesting character. And you know what? Speaking of characters, I took major offense when it came to the characters in FF13. I thought most of them were not very compelling or well written. 13-2 does not suffer as much from that problem, mostly for the fact that the main cast has been shrunken significantly. You'll only really get to know Sarah, Noel, Caius, Hope, Yule, and to a minor extent Alyssa. There are other returning characters as well, but they are mostly delegated to small and insignificant roles. Saz just shows up to fly an airship at the end, and Snow shows up to punch a giant slime. I like Sarah and Noel as protagonists, Sarah having the tables flipped from FF13, in which Lightning was trying to save her in that game, and now it's her trying to save Lightning. Her character stays mostly the same throughout the entire story, and honestly, whilst she's portrayed as the main character, she kinda takes a back seat to her supporting main protagonist, Noel. Noel is from the future in which Cocoon fell and most humans have been wiped out, as is the main antagonist, Caius. Because of this, a lot of the time it feels like the story is more geared towards Noel being the major player, since he's got a stronger connection to both Yule and Caius and the conflict at hand. Noel also really doesn't change much. Both he and Sarah are pretty steadfast in the characters that they are, both being pretty much unequivocally good and wanting to save the world and restore the timeline and, prevent the future in which everyone dies from coming to pass. They don't change much from that. Hope is the only character other than Lightning to return from the first game's playable cast that has a major role. He's grown up into a smart scientist and leads most major projects that the Academy has going on. He helps Noel and Sarah a ton throughout their journey, and most of the game's runtime is spent helping him out on whatever project he's working on or fixing a mistake that messes up the future. Alyssa is the only other notable new addition to the cast other than Caius and Yule, who I'll talk about in a moment, that gets a lot of screen time. She only gets as much as she does though because she kinda clings to Hope's side. Her betrayal of the main cast is probably the most interesting character moment from the game because it feels human. She should have died during a cave-in during the Purge, but she was revived when Etro freed everyone from Crystal, making her a paradox. If the cast fixes the timeline, she'll cease to be, and she's scared of that, so she does whatever she can to prevent it from coming to pass. She is serving in her own selfish act of wanting to live, and it's interesting. It's interesting stuff. This is the kind of character and story writing that I wish every character in the game had. On to Caius and Yule now. If there is one thing that Square Enix does well, it is writing villains that you can empathize with. Caius is like a father who is being forced to watch his daughter die hundreds of times over, and he eventually reaches a breaking point where he can't watch it anymore, and instead chooses to take matters into his own hands to try and save her, even if that's not what she wants. Yule's character is tragic. She's granted the ability to see the future, but each time that she has a vision, a bit of her life is stripped away. Thus, she always dies around the age of 15 and is reborn as a different version of herself. I can't really comment on her personality because we don't get to know her too well before she dies each time, but each one is different, as Caius points out in the end, where one might dream of traveling, another might like to collect flowers, so on and so forth. 13.2 has some really nice characters and also some mediocre and bland characters. Sarah and Noel serve as perfectly fine protagonists, although I wish we'd have gotten more from them in terms of character arcs. The returning cast of characters are a mixed bag of underwhelming, underutilized, and improvements from the first game, whilst a lot of the new characters show a promising future when it comes to the writing going into Lightning Return. So, before I jump into the conclusion and my final thoughts on the game, I wanted to just take a moment here to talk about the music, because 13 and 13.2 so far have been absolutely outstanding when it comes to their soundtracks. There are so many great tracks from both games, and I wish I had touched on it more when I was talking about FF13, but I think 13.2 has probably my favorite soundtrack from any Final Fantasy game, and I commend everyone who worked on it. Like, someone had to sit down and think, so we have the cast fighting this giant orange jelly monster. Should the track sound something like this?
Everybody get up, it's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down. Welcome to the Space Jam. Here's your chance, do your dance at the Space Jam. Alright.
Or should it sound something like this? I really cannot give this game's soundtrack enough praise, so I'll just take the time to play you guys a few of my favorite tracks.
Find another view. Chase the tender light. Borders, let's cross over.
That's enough listening to music though. We should get to wrapping up this video. I think, as an overall experience, when the game is working and isn't a buggy mess, that FF13-2 is an improvement to FF13. I think both games have their strengths and their weaknesses, and I can totally understand if someone might like one and dislike the other, because they are different enough that they provide their own unique experiences. Me personally, I enjoyed 13-2 more, which I was expecting. I will admit, I had rose-tinted glasses for this game. I remembered enjoying it a lot more than I did this time. I remembered it as a great experience, but going back and replaying it, I was greeted with a just alright experience. As I said with 13, I wouldn't recommend you play this game over the slew of better JRPGs out there, but if you have the desire to play it, then you will probably find yourself enjoying it, if you can get it to work anyways. That is it though. That is the end of the video. I hope that overall this video is an improvement from my FF13 video. I honestly might, go back and redo that one someday because, to be honest, I'm not all that happy with it, and I welcome discussion in the comments, and I implore you guys to point out if I missed anything or I got something wrong or you have something to add. Please, I welcome it. I want to improve. I want to make better videos, so, don't hold back. And if you watched this far, you might as well drop a like and subscribe. But until next time, when I'll be covering Lightning Returns, take care and sweet dreams.